I'm Melanie Hobbs, Senior Associate Director of Educational Issues. On behalf of the American Federation of Teachers, thank you for joining the Identity-Affirming Classroom Team Thought Partner Series. And thank you all of the warriors, allies, and change makers who day in and day out carry out the mission of empowering schools, families, and the broader community to create and sustain learning environments where students feel a sense of safety and connectedness, can show up as their authentic selves, develop purpose and agency, and celebrate the diversity in the world around us. If you joined us for episode 1 and 2, then you know how this will flow. But for those of you joining us for the first time, I'd like to introduce leading authors and longtime friends of the AFT, Dr. Becky Cohn-Vargas and Dr. Debbie Zakarian, who will be discussing key ideas and practical strategies from their new book, Identity Safe Spaces at Home and School, Partnering to Overcome Inequity. Dr. Becky Cohn-Vargas spent over 35 years as a teacher, principal, and curriculum director, also a superintendent in rural, urban, and suburban districts. In each setting, she focused on educational equity and effective strategies for diverse populations. Her work, along with other experts in the field, was integral to the development and design of resources and professional learning modules created by the AFT Identity-Affirming Classroom team. Dr. Zakarian, founder of Zakarian and Associates, brings 3 decades of combined experience as a university faculty member, educational service agency leader, and district administrator. With scholarship in responsive leadership, instructional practices, family-school partnerships, and policy analysis to benefit student outcomes, we are so excited and honored to have her here with us today. Our moderator for today's episode, featuring chapters 5, 6, and 7 of the book, is member of the AFT Identity-Affirming Classroom team, K-12 math coach, and executive vice president of the West Warwick Teachers Alliance, Audra McPhillips. Audra has spent 28 years in education teaching first grade, sixth grade, and high school math. She has been researching and co-creating professional development modules to support other educators in creating and sustaining identity-safe and affirming classrooms, as well as serving as a national trainer in the AFT's Thinking Math courses for grades K through 8. Before I turn it over to Audra to introduce our guest contributor, Chen Kong Wick, whose lived experiences were chronicled in the chapters we'll cover today, I wanted to remind everyone to use the Q&A widget to submit a question for any of our panelists as you watch and listen in. We will get back to you as soon as possible to keep the conversation going. Audra?
Thank you, Melanie. It is my pleasure to introduce Chen Kong Wick. Chen is a program manager for expanded learning. Her life experience has made her uniquely aware of the obstacles confronting children and families and has fueled her passion for equitable change. As a district employee for Oakland Unified School District for over 20 years, Chen uses her life experience to develop protocols and systems for equitable and transformative change for a better future. When the pandemic started, Chen really started to focus on learning to practice radical healing through playing with dirt, baking, and Frankenstein, her vegetable garden in her backyard. So now that you know who is who and who is here, I'm going to get this started with a question that I have for Becky. Becky, one of the most powerful chapters for me in the book that we're discussing today was focused on harnessing the power of connectedness, cooperation, and compassion. So my question is, can you explain why connectedness, cooperation, and compassion are important when fostering identity safety in students, as well as how those concepts relate to each other?
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here for our 3rd webinar, and we have had such a wonderful time getting to talk with one another and sharing about the book in the first 2 sessions. And today, as we talk about compassion and caring it's very central to the concept of identity safety. So we start by talking about relationships. Relationships based on mutual trust and dignity are the foundation of identity safety. Children and adults need to feel we belong, we need to feel connected to others, and that is actually a basic human need. We're social creatures. So researchers have actually found that promoting cooperation is what builds quality relationships, and valuing diversity and social competencies helps a person feel connected and able to cope with stress and adversity. We cultivate identity-safe relationships by learning to be respectful and cooperative. And it's not only among students, but it's between teacher and student, and it's among staff, and it's with families, and of course, when students are at home with their families. So the book tries to bring all of that together. And when we help each other to connect and collaborate and become compassionate, that already opens pathways and makes us feel a greater sense of inclusion and belonging. And feeling connected and empathy really go hand in hand, and we can help develop them simultaneously. The Greater Good Science Center describes two types of empathy, affective and cognitive. Affective empathy refers to sensations and feelings we get in response to others' emotions. This can be kind of a mirroring, feeling what someone else is feeling, or feeling stressed when you detect another person's anxiety or fear. I once had a dog, and when I would get sick and get a cough, the dog would come over to me and just stand by me. We called her the nurse. Cognitive empathy is actually a little different, and it's sometimes referred to as perspective taking. That's our ability to understand other people's emotions. My dog probably didn't try and imagine what it was like to be in my shoes, but people can do that. We can teach kids how. We might have a scenario, for example, that we propose and talk to them about a bullying incident, and then ask kids what it might have felt like if it happened to them. It also draws on our innate tendencies about caring for ourselves and others, and our motivation to be free from fear of threat. Compassion is a force for healing trauma and the deep hurt that many, many students experience and that we all experience at some time in our lives. One way to cultivate compassion is to teach children to be upstanders who speak up for themselves and for others. The word itself can empower students to make an active change in their schools and to build communities that support many kinds of differences and unify everyone against intolerance. We can teach them to be upstanders through discussions, pointing out examples, and inviting children to share their own experiences. And we can, of course, like I said, present age-appropriate scenarios for them to explore and analyze. Middle and high school students can practice speaking up when they hear a racial or homophobic slur, and we can explain how to intervene safely without making the fight get worse, but yet help stop bullying from happening. We also can teach both younger and older students to get help from a trusted adult when necessary. So it's very important that when we talk about compassion and connectedness and good relationships, that we also walk the walk and be positive role models for teachers, for students, for families. Identity safety fosters individual and interpersonal compassion, but it can also extend to working for systemic change. And we can really work to remediate inequitable conditions that cause suffering. There's so many ways to do it.
Thank you, Becky. I so appreciate you talking about how all of those things connected. I think what resonated with me was that term you used of an upstander. I hadn't heard of that until I read the book, and the notion behind it is so powerful, and I appreciate having language to attach to that. as an instructional coach, I spend my days with teachers who are always, clamoring for strategies that they can implement in their classrooms and their learning communities right away. And I know right now we feel this particular urgency when we start to talk about identity safety. So I would love it if you could continue to share more ways to promote cooperation and compassion among the students, including helping them reduce prejudice as they learn how to be upstanders who speak up and stand up for themselves and others.
Sure. Well, actually, let me start by saying, really, that word upstander I learned as part of doing bullying prevention. And I was working with a group of students in New Jersey, some high school students, and they actually created an upstander campaign where they were teaching each other at the high school level, and then they went to the middle and elementary school levels and taught kids how to be upstanders. And then what's even more cool is that when two of the students who'd been leaders in this project went on to college, they decided to start a campaign to get the word upstander in the dictionary, and they were successful. And so if you ever want to learn about this, the organization, we can maybe put it in our resource list, Not in Our Town, has a video of these students in Watchung, New Jersey, doing this campaign, the upstander campaign. But there are many, many ways to help students learn to be compassionate and caring. And sometimes it's just a matter of valuing and validating a student's background in a very normal way, not making it into something exotic or different, but something as simple as I remember when a child from El Salvador in one of the schools where I was working just lit up when I asked him to teach the other students how to count to 10 in Spanish. It was such a simple thing, and it was so much fun, and it just made him feel great, and he felt a sense of belonging. And it wasn't highlighting him only. I also did things with my students, like one year I did an activity where every student wrote about what they did for the winter holidays, and then we actually sent it to the newspaper and it got published. And so each of the students had something to contribute. We can also teach students how to build a culture of independence and interdependence where everyone cares for each other, and we work on creating classroom norms together. How would you like this class to be? And that is a simple process, and kids at the younger levels can brainstorm, and you can post it up on the wall, all their ideas, and then put them together in a little list of classroom norms for how we want to treat each other. Part of the process for helping students feel connected is reducing prejudice. And in the book by Gordon Allport, a groundbreaking book written in the 50s called The Nature of Prejudice, he identified 4 research ways to reduce prejudice, and educators and families can do these at home and at school. The first one is obvious: acquaintance potential, just getting to know people from different backgrounds in meaningful ways. And there's nothing better than getting to know people personally. And one way we can do it is we can create groupings in our classroom, and we can juggle the groupings around so that by the end of the year, everyone's had a chance to interact with everyone else in the classroom. Another one of Gordon Allport's list of ways to reduce prejudice is by creating equal status. It's very important to level the playing field and really be paying attention to status in our classrooms, doing different activities where kids shine in different ways all the time. So there isn't always the teacher's pet idea, the one kid that always gets called on. Many different ways to let kids shine. There was one girl who knew how to help explain the teacher's directions, and she had a really good way of doing that, and the teacher would call on her, and she would do that for the class. The third way is to reduce prejudice is getting everyone to cooperate in kind of a project, a larger project, where they're all working together and can express their unique identities. So you can imagine a huge stadium, everyone's cheering for the team. They're cheering together, so they're part of something that they want to do together. And when I taught fourth grade, my students did a video project, and each one had a different role, but we were all working on the same video, and we edited it all together. The whole class video was edited together with different sections. And there was one boy who really didn't have an easy time at school, and he struggled with reading, but he wrote a rap for this video, and he performed it, and it made him look very cool in everybody's eyes, and it kind of transformed how he saw himself. The fourth area is very important, and that's social and institutional support. Basically, legitimization by authorities, saying this is important. And it could be the teacher, the principal, it could be the school or the district motto, but all of it comes together to show everyone this is what matters in our community. And one thing I did was, when I was a curriculum director, was give out rainbow flags to the principals so they could put them in their pencil boxes. And that way they were giving a loud and clear message. This is a safe way for LGBTQ families. So we need to notice and remedy bias when it happens in ways that don't shame people, but become a learning experience, and acknowledge our errors. We're all going to make them. And with parents, we can listen to the child and listen to our children and really pay attention to them and what they're saying. And we can address concerns at school and basically also teach them to speak up and stand up for themselves. So I'm going to let you go with, I could go on, and I have many, many ideas, and there are many more in the book, but there's all day long, we're teaching and modeling, caring and compassion.
Thanks so much, Becky. So many truly powerful things you said there. The part about giving yourself grace because you're not going to be perfect at this at first hit me right away. We talk, as an instructional coach, I'm always supporting teachers with ways that you group students in your classroom. And, of course, we always talk about looking at data and grouping students, thinking about the real academic pieces, but your that notion of attention to acquaintance and, the potential that has when we think about how we group our students really hit me, as well as that equal status idea. Just all students have brilliance in our classroom that we need to elevate. And so thank you for sharing those very specific ideas. People can do things with that right away in their classrooms tomorrow. Becky, one more question. You and Debbie also discuss the power of social emotional learning in your book. Can you tell us more about why it's important to include SEL in this conversation?
Absolutely. All this is about helping kids develop the skills and the capacities and the attitudes to manage their emotions, to achieve their personal and collective goals, and to feel and show empathy for each other and learn how to make relationships. And identity safety overlaps with all of the aspects of social emotional learning. As students help grow and develop healthy identities, they can begin to really get that social emotional learning down. And so we want to help kids develop and strengthen interpersonal skills, become self-aware of their feelings, and learn to self-regulate. And we talk a lot about an aspect of self-regulation that often doesn't get discussed, which is helping kids learn to read their own reactions in their body language. And basically, children can sense, as we say, quote, my body knows when I feel good and when I feel respected and when I feel safe. So we can ask even young children, what are the times you felt most that way? And a child might say, I feel that way when I'm with my puppy, or when I'm with my grandma, or when I'm climbing a tree. And now that I am a grandma, I hope my grandson says, I try and make him feel really good. But we could teach and draw on the resources they have when they're upset or in an activated state. And after we've done activities like this, we can say, think about when you're with your grandma, or take a breath. That's what we always say to our grandson, and just try and calm down. So we don't do this to help them distract from their feelings, but to help them resource emotions and get back integrated into their bodies. And they can learn each other's signals for when they're not feeling a sense of safety. It helps us get through challenging moments. And as we know, in a world where road rage runs rampant, we all need to work on this. And we can help them develop the language for their feelings. One teacher we interviewed used a weather metaphor for her high school students. And she'd start her class by saying, "What weather do you feel on the inside today?" And she had different signals, and they'd raise their one finger or two fingers to show how they felt. And then later, she would check back with the ones who weren't feeling well or who were feeling agitated. And this allowed them to realize that our feelings change. They're not static, they're moving. And that's a real important thing for people of all ages, but high school students especially, to realize. And of course, we have so much abuse, neglect, and kids who have household challenges and home situations that may give them a sense of uncertainty, and it may even turn into chronic stress. And so we're helping them learn to manage their emotions in the process. All of these aspects of social emotional learning contribute to child's sense of identity safety. And one thing that worries me is there are people, media outlets, and some parent groups that are in opposition to SEL, and they call it indoctrination. And we talk about this in the book, and we say it's the opposite of indoctrination. And really, in all classrooms, we need to help people not only academically, but socially, because ultimately it's helping them make wise decisions for their lives and make wise decisions in their profession and at work, and choosing when to not be reactive. It's so important. And a meta-analysis of 200 SEL programs in the US demonstrated that it had value in improving behavior and achievement. And longitudinal studies in rural and urban settings showed that kids who experienced social emotional learning at school had a greater chance of graduating, completing college, and not having criminal records. We need to all have access to this data, which we tell you where to find it in the book, to counter misinformation about SEL and reinforce the social and emotional benefits as we work to ensure identity safety.
Thank you so much. I feel like this whole notion of that SEL is the opposite of indoctrination was another piece in the book that really stood out to me. I think as teachers, we worry. We know there are people in our community who feel strongly about having students not participate in SEL. So having the research alluded to that in your book that shows that this works, and the resources are super powerful. I can't wait till everyone can have your book and I can host some of these conversations with my colleagues about these ideas. So now I'm going to turn over to you for a bit, Chen. As a Cambodian living in a refugee camp, and then coming here to learn English and a new culture as a 7-year-old, can you describe some of the things your teachers and others who influenced your life did that helped you feel a sense of belonging and being included?
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I really appreciate it. Before I answer that question, I want to give the context that as a Cambodian refugee, all the responses, we were resettled in multiple states, ranging from Illinois to Rhode Island to Massachusetts, and then to California, Southern California, and Northern California. So the response that I'm about to give is like a compilation of so many things and moments in the education systems. So how individuals that was able to create a sense of belonging and being included is, I could just remember being at one of the grade school in the East Coast, Providence, Rhode Island, where actually the entire teacher knew that there were a large group of refugee students coming to the school. And so the teachers were very welcoming, and I was placed. And how, looking back, how I knew it was welcoming is that there was a dedicated teacher that received a large number of newcomer students. And she was happy. How I knew she was happy is she would be humming, singing, and I would be one of those students who would show up early just to check in with her, because she, when I enrolled in the school, even though there were other newcomer students there, she allowed me and invited me to, like, you know, Chin, at any given time, if you want to come early to get to know me. So it was all about her, not about me, you know, just to connect with her. And I did, and I took the opportunity, and she would like be there an hour before class. And I was one of those kids that was just raced to school just to connect with her. And then she allowed me to stay in the classroom, help her out, and she would be preparing class, and I would see how all that preparation that she did before school and then implement it during the regular school time. And just little things that she did besides being happy implementing the curriculum was that even though we were all newcomers, and I recall one student that was, and we were all Southeast Asian, there was one kid that was from South Africa. She purposely included, you know, connect me to this student and allowed me to like be the leader and help him to transition and shadow. There are moments where she allowed enrolled the entire school to do an assembly. So looking back, I think what she did was created an opportunity where a group of newcomer kids was presenting at a school assembly, allowing us to use the skill set. And I remember having to rehearse doing the Family Feud. And I recall of like, you know, here I am trying to learn and master the English language, but she had the confidence enough to like, Chen, you got this, you know, just practice. And we would script the words together. And, you know, as I look back, it was just one of those things. Imagine being able to learn how to master the English language, let alone trying to stand in front of people and give the presentation. And she was there to just like, you know, reassuring from a side and behind, and just allow all of us as newcomers to actually present to the rest of the school community. And then I think overall that particular school, looking back, there were not just her, it was like the music teacher who enjoyed teaching, and he would be singing and allowing us using singing songs as a way to practice English language. And then the art teacher, I would be one of those kids who were super, you know, perfectionist and just wanted to land it perfectly. But, you know, when you're talking about art, it was just one of those things that is just the courageous to take the first step of just draw or do something. So I think if it was a combination, and then the last piece of like educators that created the sense of belonging and inclusion was that was this moment where a PE teacher that I had, she was amazing from the lens of like, I was not the greatest athletic kid in the world, but I was competitive, and she knew that, and she saw something in me when we would ever participate in team sports. She would be like waiting for kids to just volunteer, and then I would, you know, look to see who would step up, and then the boys would be raising their hands, and she'd be like, okay, I'm waiting for some other group of kids who would like to volunteer and step up. I know, you know, leadership is hard, but, you know, somebody got to do it. And then she would like pause and wait and look around long enough where I finally just needed that extra pause time to allow me to like swallow the nervousness and then just step up. And I did step up. And then, you know, so she would actually organize these games to allow us to step up and be team members. And then when Becky was talking about, you know, addressing issues of race, she did moments of like where, even though it was a group of newcomer and this child, this other kid was from Africa, some of the kids was like, ooh, why are you touching him? You know, she was watching as far as me stepping up, me picking him as far as the first kid that I would, you know, if I was the team captain, I would call on him. And at the end of that class sessions that year, she recognized me as far as taking leadership, but she didn't just, you know, call me out. She did it in such a way of calling us in to take on a leadership role in a mindful way that didn't allow shaming. She allowed me to use my skill, even though I was still developing my skill as a leader. So I feel like that particular school community allowed me to step in and feel included. While in another situation, I also moved to another school district where the feeling of inclusions was spoken but not in action. And one example is when a teacher was just like, oh, welcome, Chen. You know, you're more than welcome to sit wherever you want, which I appreciate that. But it was these subtle comments that I got that didn't felt like I was seen, heard from the other school. It was like, wow, Chen, you speak English well. I didn't think you would, you speak at all. And it was those minor microaggressions. And then it was others like, it was right. I recall as a child, that scenario is when a support staff was talking to her daughter who works, you know, she works there and her daughter was in my class. And I recall her, she was negotiating with her daughter of like, just give up your earmuffs and give it to Chen because it's cold and she needs it. And then at the same breath, she's all like, I will buy you a new one. And then in my head, I'm like, I don't want her to use earmuff. But it was that level of like, you know, the self-pity of like giving this poor refugee students a hand-me-down item. So at that time, early on, growing up, there were moments that schools created a moment, an experience of belongings, and others that you knew you were not welcome.
Chen, I can't thank you enough for sharing your story, both in the book and here. Just listening to you speak. And thank you for doing so, because microaggressions are real. These are obviously moments that have stayed with you because you're an adult now and they're still there. And I think that's a really important reminder to all of us who support students when we think about identity, safety in our spaces. I was really excited to hear that you had positive experiences in Providence, Rhode Island. I'm a teacher in West Warwick, Rhode Island, and through the Rhode Island Federation of Teachers, we just do a lot of work with colleagues in Providence. And so, it warmed my heart to hear that you had some really positive experiences there. And one last connection I want to make before I ask a question is just Becky talked about the research behind connectedness, cooperation, and compassion. And when you were talking about some of your experiences with those teachers in Providence, it really came alive. So just again, thank you for sharing your story. It helps so much. Debbie, we haven't had a chance to hear your voice yet. So my next question is going to come over to you. Chen just did this great job talking about influential people in her life who, had a positive impact on her sense of belonging. And I know you talk in the book about the importance of a strength-based approach and a growth mindset when we're thinking about that positive impact. So can you say more, or actually, can you start to talk about, because, I've read the book, our audience hasn't, how can this strength-based approach that fosters a growth mindset support students and families on a path to identity safety?
Yeah, thank you. And hi, everyone. And thank you, Melanie, for such a wonderful introduction to this topic, to Becky for really helping us sort of ground ourselves in some of these key concepts around identity safety. Audrey, you're a wonderful moderator when we've shared so many great examples. You have so many great comments. And Chen, I really appreciate what you shared about your refugee experience coming to Providence and then going elsewhere and not experiencing the same sense. So it's that way of talking about what do we mean by a strength-based and what do we mean when we use words like microaggression, discrimination, prejudice, so on and so forth. What does all of that look like? And what does the research say? And what's so fascinating about this field is prior to the 1990s, which to some degree, 3 decades isn't that long ago, the field, what's helpful is to understand that the fields of psychiatry, psychology, social work, and education, the focus of the work was on identifying and treating challenges. So we would look for what wasn't going well, and we would treat the problem. And that is now referred to as using a deficit-based approach, where we concentrate on identifying or perceiving what's wrong. And Chen had a great example. Her teacher perceived that, well, Chen needs earmuffs, and took action in a way that didn't make Chen feel very good. So in a certain sense, that exemplifies a teacher identifying what is wrong or what they perceive as wrong, most importantly, and finding a remedy for it without giving some sense of empowerment to students and their families and even others. So there's been this large body of research, for example, looking at this sort of, how do we look at students who don't speak English? How do we talk about parents who seem like they're very busy? And a teacher might say, well, they're too busy to help us. Those are all sort of deficit-based statements that look at a problem that we perceive and come up with what we think might be happening, too busy to help us, when really parents could be helping us in so many wonderful, creative ways. So in the 90s, a lot of research had been done on this deficit-based approach, and researchers looked at outcomes. All these years of using a deficit-based approach, what happened? And the research showed that it had very little impact on student outcomes. In fact, it made most students have negative outcomes. Many dropped out. Many didn't feel school was a place for them. They didn't feel safe. They didn't feel a sense of belonging. They didn't feel valued. They certainly didn't feel competent. And very importantly, many students didn't have the confidence to speak up on behalf of themselves and others. So research started occurring by many, many people. Maslow is one, Molamonti and Gonzalez is another, many large bodies of research on what happens when we spend as much or if not more time on what's going well and a strength of students. What's a strength that students possess and their families possess and we possess? And one of the most well-known researchers on this topic is Carol Dweck, a psychologist. She helps us to see that students indeed do succeed so much more when we use positive asset-based language, are positive in our intent, and positive in our belief that all students have the capacity to succeed, and we believe in them that they will succeed. Like that wonderful example that Chen gave about her wonderful teacher who really welcomed Chen in and saw all the goodness that Chen had to offer. And look at how much she empowered Chen to work with others and even speak before the whole school, I think Chen said. That's pretty powerful. So what Dweck's research showed is that this happens when we ask students to do 3 things. One is when we acknowledge and we embrace their efforts to learn. So when students show any form of effort, we want them to embrace and celebrate that. And we want to acknowledge it. We also want to, what Dweck has seen is that when we show students that we see value in their persistence, in their efforts, that we can help them instill a value in being persistent as well. And third, when we encourage and even inspire students to do more. So you can see from Chen's story, wow, look at all that Chen accomplished. How wonderful. So Dweck calls that a growth mindset, that we really believe that all students have the capacity to grow. And she contrasts that with an opposite, a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And what she says is, looking at a fixed mindset, which a lot of teachers may have, and a lot of the research done before the 90s showed that a lot of us believed that change was never possible. We might have felt so hopeless about our students' circumstances and helpless to help them that we kind of believed that nothing we would do worked. And of course, what happened? Nothing worked. It was like a self-fulfilling prophecy. The point is that once we have these deficit fixed mindsets, it almost is a self-fulfilling prophecy that we cannot, and indeed students won't, grow and change and have a growth mindset. So it's very different when we look at the distinctions between having a deficit-based and an asset-based mindset. And all of the research on using an asset-based mindset clearly shows that students do far better. So there's another important element that we talk about in the book, and that is how important it is for us to no longer work in silos. And the reason for that is so many students have so many diversities and diverse identities, and in this rapidly changing population. And what we talk about is that as our students are coming to us and their families are coming to us, we really don't want to have a fixed mindset on any one particular student. We want to have the possibility of understanding that our individual perspectives about our students, their families, ourselves, and others always benefit from another point of view. None of us has all the answers, especially regarding the complexities of working with multi-diverse students, because we always will only see a partial picture of a whole. And it requires the support of others to help us see the many, many positives of what's really there, and constantly using an asset-based approach and growth mindset to help us all get there.
Thank you, Debbie. In our IACT group that Melanie mentioned earlier, the Identity-Affirming Classroom teamwork through AFT, we have this PD module that I actually helped design, focused on how to reframe deficit language and deficit thinking in the school community, in your classroom, in your home. So this whole asset-based approach mindset thing that you described was something I connected with right away. And just hearing you talk again about it, you know, teachers, we in the water around us in our schools is often a lot of deficit language and deficit thinking. And it's something that once you become more aware of, you recognize really quickly, and you know that you need to reflect on and do better. And I need to reflect on it and do better myself. It's something I have to constantly be mindful of. And so, so some of your examples there were really helpful to remind me to do that. Chen, I'm going to throw this back to you for a moment, just because we heard you talk a lot about your story as a child, trying to navigate a system that, you know, didn't always serve you, but definitely had some good moments. But we haven't had a chance yet to talk about the ways in which you are such an impressive educational leader in your space. You know, Debbie just talked about what a nice result that was for you. It doesn't, you know, turn out that way for everyone who isn't as affirmed as you were. So can you tell us what helped you develop a sense of agency and what empowered you to become the educational leader you are today?
Yeah, looking back, I think it started with my dad. I recall one moment in time when the school has called him for this meeting, and as young as I was and didn't understand English, I was watching and observing what the adults was doing. And I recall being pulled into this meeting, and then there were flashcards being presented to me before my eyes, and people were taking notes. And then all of a sudden, all these adults were sitting around me and talking. And then, so my first introduction to my dad teaching me agency was when he stood up for me and advocated for me, because the school wanted to refer me to to the special education program. And then my dad pushed hard, but as hard as he could, because he's such a well-humbled manner, because education is one of those things that he respect. Educators is who respect. And I recall him saying, it's my daughter doesn't belong in your program. My daughter just didn't have enough time to go to school. Looking back, what that moment of what he taught me as an educator, it was that the education field did not take the time to understand the history and the context, because when you understand my specific history, if a teacher actually take time to look as far as like, okay, Chin is in school, she's probably 9. And so that means if you look at Cambodian refugee story during the killing field, she was actually growing up in, a world that education wasn't available at that time. So I think instead of the default of pausing and, learning and taking, the inquiry stance of my circumstance, it was just like, just what Debbie mentioned of like this fact finding of like, fulfilling prophecy of like, well, Chin didn't learn, so I'm going to just, I'm just going to refer her to the SPED office. And looking back, I didn't know any of those flashcards images because it was a cultural thing as well too. It was like an image of a firefighter that was very, European looking. And then, and then it was images that wasn't relevant based on what I was exposed to in Cambodia at that time. So it was just a minor disconnect, but how that moment when my dad stood up for me, it was just like that level of agency. And then looking back, agency was always, I forgot if it was Becky or Debbie that mentioned of like, creating the containers as educators, creating the containers for young people to just step up, because having a growth mindset is that young people have the skill set to create identity safety, not only for each other, but for themselves. So looking back, I recall advocating, creating, having a sense of agency, because my parents, during when we transitioned from moving from Cambodia to Thailand and then to the Philippines and then to Cambodia, there were one moment in time where, we didn't have enough food to eat. And they would send me to a relative and say, I'm Chen, I'm going to prepare you. So I was acting as an ambassador to advocate ways to bring back food to our family so we can eat. So I feel like what makes me a humbled parent and an educator is being able to believe that young people have the skill set to speak for themselves and to have agency. It's just creating the container and the environment and the condition for them to step up and be their best self. And that other empowerment piece, I could also experience where it didn't feel empowered was when I was in a classroom where a substitute teacher was reading names down the list, and when it got to my name, and I just remember it to this day, it's like he would get to my name and he goes, Kong, Chen Kong, are you there? And then all of a sudden he had this smirk in his face, and it just happens. It felt slow motion, but it happened so quick. And he goes, King Kong. And I was just humiliated. And the kids were laughing and giggling. And I remember a few of my close friends who sat by me knew I was hurt. And they just actually looked at me and just silently stand in solidarity of like, this is effing not fair. So that taught me that, even though sometimes adult may fail, your peers can stand up for yourself to create that identity safety. When you think about educators have such a powerful role when you add the numbers of like from kindergarten all the way to high school, which is to the 12th grade. And if you do the math, 6 hours times 180 days times, 12 or 13 years, that's close to like 15 to 20,000 hours. Imagine of like investing into like developing that child to be that kind human being. To me, I'm excited for educators of like, if they look at the math and the hours of like, what a better future we would have. So I feel like when we're talking about empowerment and agency is being able to like, it's not just a one person role, but it takes the whole entire school culture and community, and having students be part of that is a game changer, because as educators, you're not, to avoid the savior model, or like even from a management business standpoint, there's only one of you and 20 students if you're looking in the classroom, or 35. And then when you think of high school, middle and high school, you multiply that with 25 students, 7 times. It's a lot to manage. So imagine relying on the system and the students to be upstandard. And I feel like that is a best turn of investments.
Thank you, Chen. Again, I can't thank you enough for sharing your story. It just reminds us of the impact that we have on our students every day, every minute. And, the students and families that you serve in the Oakland Unified School District are definitely fortunate to have you. Speaking of families, I want to ask you, Debbie, what practices do you suggest will inspire educators to foster an approach that builds on their students, families, and their own strengths and assets?
Yeah, that is a wonderful question, especially coming on the heels of what Chen shared with us, and how brave of her father to speak up on behalf of his wonderful child, and how brave of Chen's wonderful peers to help be an upstander, even silently, on behalf of her well-being. And that's really what we want to look for, is how do we really help empower families, our students, and even ourselves, look for the best in each of us. It's sort of like when we have a best friend and we kind of can tell them anything, even when things aren't going well, because we know they have our best interest at heart. So it's that, how do we want to empower our students, our families that we work with, to be our partners, to be in it with us? And a wonderful example that we share in the book is the type of co-powered partnership. And in a way, that's what we're talking about, being collaborative, not just being empowered, but everyone being empowered, being co-powered together, being in it together. And a great example is from Mother Rebecca, who shared with us a story about her child, who's a wonderful student, who's on the autistic spectrum. His name is Matthew. And when she tells us a story about when her son was in 3rd grade, and his teacher called Rebecca and her husband and asked them for help empowering Matthew to participate in class during story time, a time during the day that Matthew seemed to be finding especially challenging. So Matthew's teacher solicited his parents' help in helping brainstorm some creative ideas about helping Matthew participate in class during story time. So they brainstormed, and Matthew's parents knew that Matthew loved getting rewards. Andy loved Star Wars. Andy loved puzzle making. And they knew that because the teacher asked them, what does your son love doing? What does he enjoy doing at home? What does he enjoy doing in school and with friends? And they said, he loves getting rewards from us. He loves Star Wars. He's seen all the movies. He loves Star Wars. And he loves to put puzzles together. So with that information, they collaboratively created a co-powered plan. And the plan is pretty fun. every week, his teacher agreed that she would print out pictures of Matthew's favorite Star Wars characters and cut these images into puzzle pieces. And when Matthew chose to participate during story time, so when Matthew was empowered or felt empowered enough to participate, and he did, the teacher would privately give him a puzzle piece and say privately that the more he felt comfortable participating and did participate, she would give him all the pieces to the puzzle and they were going to form something. So on his own, Matthew sure did participate, and he participated a lot. He made sure that every week he completed the puzzle at the end of the week. And on Friday, he proudly brought that completed puzzle home. And over the course of the school year, the puzzles got larger and Matthew had to wait longer and answer more questions, and answer he did. And one of the reasons that this plan was so successful, Rebecca tells us, was the co-powered partnership that she had between his teacher and her husband, and how they supported his strengths and capacities to have interactions in class, and just as importantly, to be able to counter negative interactions in a positive way. So they really helped him learn ways of participating, learn words that would indicate his respect for other classmates and how he could interject his own ideas. And when we look at that example through an empowerment lens, it helps us all to see the many, many possibilities of just how much we can do when we do it together using a strength-based approach.
Thank you, Debbie. Such a great example of the power of partnerships between schools and families. And I think my favorite part of the book is that you and Becky just did this wonderful job of elevating stories like this. You know, the Matthews, these are things that as a teacher, I remember and I relate to, and I can picture students in my classroom and ways in which I could just be better at doing those things. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
If you don't mind, I'd love to add a little story that I learned about Matthew. He recently took an interest in boxing. And so Rebecca's parents signed him up for a boxing class. And when in the book, we talk about how it's not just what happens at school, but it's also how we help students do after school, out of school, before school activities that engage with others. And Matthew loves boxing. And the boxing teacher loves working with Matthew. So 3 or 4 days a week on his own, Matthew goes to that boxing class from 4 to 5, and he loves boxing. And when Becky or Rebecca picks up Matthew and brings him home, the boxing teacher has taken such a liking to Matthew that he is just making Matthew feel even more positive about himself. And my point in bringing that up is, think of all the possibilities of strength-based relationships and how much we can all do to empower our wonderful students.
I love that. That's a great reminder that it doesn't always have to be the classroom teacher, that there are so many pieces that are connected that we can lean on if we know they exist. So Chen, this is actually a really nice follow-up question based on what Debbie just said, because you know, you do a lot of things to empower your own daughter. And in the book, you share some strategies that you use to support her in understanding her Cambodian identity. So can you share some of these and why you feel that they're so important?
Yeah, my daughter is biracial. She's half Norwegian and half Cambodian. And one of the pre-conversation that we had was, you know, finding moments to lift up our Cambodian culture and identities. And given that both of my parents passed away early on, it was one of those things that had to be thought of, but didn't have to be like to the extreme. So one of the pieces that we did as a family was figuring out what was her love language, and food was one of them. So we would find moments where if she would get a good grade, we would say, you know what, you get to go and pick a restaurants that we could go out as a family. And then there's, moments where, once we go out to the restaurant, we would figure out ways to come back and make meals. And there's many, meals that, it's like, in our household, my husband would make the traditional, pasta, meat and potatoes, and then mommy makes, curry and all these interesting things. And she got fond of making green curry, and I would have her just be there and help prep. And how this is, as you were introducing me earlier, of like, finding moments of radical healing is just, instead of looking for large, big moments, is looking for those small moments of just reconnecting. Because looking back, when I was growing up in my family, when I was helping my parents prepping for the food and making food, it was one of those things that was silent. So for us, we would have music that would, any excuse to generate a conversation. And generate interest and get it going. So we would be either listening to music or videos. So I would find moments, whatever food we're making, that there's some conversation of like, what do you think? And she's definitely a child of mine, because she learns how to ask open-ended questions of like, that was just like, and then she would actually throw it back to me to answer first, when it actually like, wait, kid, I'm the one who's facilitating this conversation, not you. So we would try to bring, back to my story of me growing up as a Cambodian refugee, what worked and didn't work. And then we also had, the other non-pretty side of growing up, which was, privilege and access that other folks and other kids don't have. And I knew she could handle it because, when she was young, she was also exposed to a moment in our family life where she witnessed one of our family member getting deported, in the process of getting deported. So that conversation of politics and disparity, injustice was there, where, there are another moments where we use our Cambodian conversation about the trials and tribulations of Cambodian, but also conversations of undocumented. We find moments in our regular busy life. The other love language that she likes is playing soccer and sports. So we find moments to be present, be there. And then after the game, we try to go to invite another friend that she would have to hang out with us post games. So it was one of those things that we talk about and watch movies together that cultivate our culture as a biracial family. And I wouldn't say I have all the answers, but what I do see is being able to let go, because that it is her agency and her empowerment to stand up for herself. And how I know it's working is there's moments where she's in middle school now that when she do come back to tell me, like, Mom, when I ask her, so how's school? What went well? What's your rose and thorn? And she would tell me what they are. And there's one story where she told me where a kid says, what are you? And that just flashed back of like when someone, how I felt a sense of belonging when I was a Cambodian refugee, was like, I was clinging, trying not to step in, but having her respond and said, I didn't give him a response. And I said, good for you. You don't have to, answer every question that people ask and interrogate. And I said, so did you respond? She goes, no. I said, how do you feel? She goes, no, I'm fine. Or there's another moment where a kid made again, as a mom, you cringe when another kid during class time, when this kid basically said, I thought Asian people are good in math. He said it loud enough where the rest of the class could hear. But right when he said it, he stares at my daughter, and she told me of the story. So, and then that was when we talked about, you know, people have different journey, learning journey, and that kind of stuff. So it was just, but we did it when we were sitting down making food. So it was just one of those things that as parents, during dinner time, somebody got to contribute into making the meals. And when we do have the meals, we stop what we're doing and talk about our days. And then, yeah, that's one of the many ways that we try to share about our identity, and not just within our culture, but as parents trying to navigate how to create this container of identity safety and empower our children to be their best self, because I can't go and protect them all the time. So they have to be able to stand and be upstandard for themselves.
Thank you, Chen. I could listen to you talk all day. I feel like I forgot that I was supposed to ask a question next because I was so engrossed in just the story that you tell. And I know I said your school district and your school system was lucky to have you, but your daughter is obviously incredibly lucky to have you as a mom. So much appreciation for you, both the person you are and your willingness to tell your story. So truly, thank you so much. Debbie, the last question is going to be for you. As an instructional coach in my day job, I attend and facilitate a lot of professional development. And I am keenly aware that some professional development, some PD can be so impactful, and other PD can be just the opposite. And I think that's a very real thing that teachers experience all the time. And in my role, you know, teachers' time is valuable. And I always want to make the most of those minutes that we're together. So, you know, they can feel that sense of empowerment themselves, and they can then kind of turn that around to have a maximum impact on their students. And I know the book has lots of tools. So can you share some of the tools from the book that can really help people to design and implement meaningful professional development that will support the big thing that we've been talking about through this entire podcast is, you know, that transformation to an identity-safe school?
Yeah, sure. And thank you for asking that question. When we wrote the book, we wanted to make sure that we provided a lot of tools in every chapter that educators and others could use right away. And part of our ideal was to provide strategies for designing and enacting professional development, whether you're doing it on your own, in a small group, as a college course, or for a large-scale professional development in your school, so that it could be something that will grow to a system-wide effort for promoting identity safety on a deeper level. So, for example, in Chapter 6, we provide a detailed description of a continuum of 5 developmental stages of students' receptivity to listen to others and assertiveness and be assertive with others. So we know that we want students to be empowered, but the path to get there, we have to acknowledge that students go through stages just as we all do to learn. So in the chapter, we provide, 5 continua from pre-emerging all the way up to integrating to help us in identifying students' receptivity to others and students' assertiveness with others. For example, going back to Matthew, for him to participate in class, just to participate during story time, he had to be willing to assert himself into the classroom conversation, all the while being respectful of others, and all the while engaging in a level of self-control. So those 3 things he needed to do just to be able to participate. And our goal in providing this one tool, of which we have many, many others, is to provide this sequential roadmap to give us to sort of look at who are our students, where might they be on this continua that will support us in fostering their development at home and in partnership with parents to help students listen carefully to others, observe what others say and do, pay attention to their own others' ideas and feelings and acknowledge them, and look for common ground so that they can make contributions and find the right time to speak. So those are big receptive skills that we want students to develop. And then to be assertive, we want students to learn how to agree or counter others' ideas respectively, or agree and counter others' ideas respectfully, and defend and counter an idea themselves, all the while anticipating obstacles or barriers and addressing them in a respectful way. Those are big goals that we shouldn't expect will happen overnight. So part of our tool is to give us these 5 stages and identify which stage we believe our student is so that we can help them reach the next stage. And we don't expect it to happen like that it's going to be a developmental process. So that's one tool. And then we also provide many examples and tools of moving away from a deficit-based habit. So we can give children many, many positive experiences and that continually affirm their wonderfully rich, multi-diverse identities and support us in intentionally being very intentional and strategic in looking for and routinely sharing what students are doing well so that they and their families, and we too, can celebrate their many successes. And then we take the leap and draw from the research on showing the wonderful importance of K-12 having student-led conferences where students are empowered to share their learning with their families and with their teachers. And we show how these can occur in school and asynchronistically using computer-mediated formats and synchronistically using an online format of, face chat or WhatsApp or some sort of convention that parents use and that schools use. So students of all ages might prepare a video recording, a Google Doc, or some other form of sharing what they're learning and what they're doing so that we all can have an opportunity to celebrate our students' successes. And we provide clear tools for holding a number of school and home events in various locations with families. And our goal is to have 4 purposes. The first is just have a space to build social relationships with families, such as a potluck supper or a picnic or gathering at a park or elsewhere, to just have that relationship building, these relationship building interactions to build trust, build a sense of safety and belonging and value and competence that really sparks parents' trust in us, that we believe in their in promoting their confidence to speak up on behalf of themselves and others. And second, creating events where students have the ripe opportunity to share what they're learning. Third, we really want to support all types of homeschool connections on what students are doing and what we hope they'll do. And creating all these spaces and opportunities with families in ways that work for all of us is so important. And then lastly, and as importantly, we know that every family is a rich, amazing resource. And how we can tap into families as resources is something that we provide throughout the book. So all of these many tools and all of these ideas that we've shared throughout this podcast and just now have the potential and the evidence to really do what needs to be done. And that is to interrupt inequities, expand students' endless capacities, and really illuminate a path forward for creating identity-safe spaces at home and at school, And when we wrote the book, we firmly believe that there is absolutely no better time to do this than right now.
Amazing stories, amazing practical examples. It's just, I can think of so many more adjectives to talk about just this experience within this hour or so that we've been together. So thank you so much, Becky, Audra, Chen, Debbie, for partnering with the AFT to highlight real solutions for kids and families, and for providing tried and true approaches to sustaining equitable learning communities. So many things resonated with me. I just picked out a couple of words, and one of the words, or I guess prefixes, that showed up all the time was this notion of cooperate, co-create, co-regulate, co-empower. So many examples of the way in which that we can do this together. Thinking about Chen's story, and we're still doing this today, when they were assessing her, when the district was assessing your prowess, your academic knowledge, and how your history and your context wasn't even present into those flashcard images. That is so important as we look at the way we assess students today, and we're still doing that, and we need to stop it. This asset-based approach, the power of names and not playing around with people's names, that's so important. Knowing the research that Becky and Debbie shared with us so that we can counter that narrative that's out there. And really, I love what Debbie said at the end: interrupt, expand, and illuminate. Like those three words just really sums it up of what we were talking about today. So this actually concludes our Thought Partner series. And we are so grateful to those of you who have journeyed with us throughout these last 3 episodes in the midst of your own busy lives and schedules. So what's next? Be on the lookout for information on how to participate in our final XChat. And don't forget to complete the exit ticket. We really want to hear about what resonated with you, the strategies you plan to implement personally and professionally in your school, home, or organization. And we also want to find out what promising practices are working for you in your setting. Make sure to download your certificate and check out the supporting resource list for this episode. Thank you so much. Be well, go forth, and continue to carry out the mission to overcome inequity.